Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode Chomping at the Bit. Now, we all know this past weekend the College Football Playoff Committee got together. They gave us our final rankings for the four teams that we will see in the College Football Playoff, which I believe the semifinals will be New Year's Eve. And there was a lot of speculation, after what transpired on Saturday, where TCU lost in the Big 12 championship. USC, we know who was fourth going into the weekend, lost in the Pac 12 championship to Utah. So a lot of people were wondering what would the committee do with spots 3 and 4? Because I think most people looked at this going into the weekend as Georgia and Michigan pretty much set at 1 and 2. So there was questions about could Alabama get back in? Could Ohio State get back in? Could we get some kind of weird scenario where even a Tennessee possibly gets back in? I don't know how that would have happened, but well, I mean, Then of course, if those, championship game losses didn't happen, then it would have been really straightforward and we would just have the same four teams from this past weekend going into the playoff. But that didn't happen. So a lot of intrigue coming up to was it Sunday night at 7 or Sunday at noon, I believe, is when they announced the final four teams. And to me, I thought this one was a no brainer this year. That yes, TCU, USC both lost, but I thought TCU deserved to stay in the four because getting your first loss in a championship game by 3 points in overtime, I don't know if that's enough to fully drop you out, especially when the teams that are sitting at 5 and 6 aren't even playing in the championship game. The USC one, I mean, I felt like there was no chance for them to stay because they were fourth already, and that was their second loss of the season to the same Utah team. That doesn't look good for them, so I knew they were going to drop out. Then it became Ohio State versus Alabama. I thought Ohio State should have jumped up, so I was going into Sunday thinking it was going to be Georgia, Michigan, TCU, Ohio State. So ultimately, we get to the unveiling, and wouldn't you know it, those are the four that we get. So I would say committee completely got this right. Now, seeing the four teams, once again, Georgia number one, Michigan number two, TCU number three, Ohio State number four. We started hearing Alabama fans because Alabama fans, from the moment we learned that LSU was going to be the SEC West representative in the SEC title game, Alabama fans are trying to figure out ways to get Alabama into the top four. Ultimately, they would have needed, utter chaos at the top, which they got some chaos, just not enough to get Alabama up there. And then even after the four were announced, everybody was talking about asking the committee chair, what's Boo something was his name, about Alabama versus Ohio State and what did it come down to. Now, to me, if you're looking at both Ohio State and Alabama, I feel like the conversation probably begins and ends with Ohio State one loss to Alabama's two. I wouldn't say begins and ends with. That's where it begins. Ohio State one loss, Alabama two. That's your first talking point. Second point would be Alabama's two losses, whereby I think it combined 3 points against Tennessee and LSU, who at the time, I believe both of those teams and both of those situations were top 10, I think. Okay. Michigan, you would go with, they lost to the number two team, Michigan, in the country, who's also undefeated and finished their year undefeated by winning the Big Ten championship. Now, Ohio State lost that game against them by, was it 3 scores? Although going into the fourth quarter, it was a 1 score game. So you could kind of analyze that game how you want, but that's their one loss. So do you put that at a higher level than Alabama losing to two teams that didn't really finish the year off as well as they wanted to? Because Tennessee went on to lose to South Carolina kind of convincingly, and then LSU got their fourth loss in the SEC title game. So that had to be part of the conversation as well. Then, I guess the third point would be Alabama's brand versus Ohio State's brand. That one I think is a wash because both of them are big brands across the country. So I don't think that favors Alabama either. So I just think ultimately Alabama couldn't win the argument against Ohio State. So Ohio State getting in made sense to me. Then the Alabama argument turned to TCU. I think a lot of people had questions about TCU. You know, TCU went into the Big 12 championship undefeated, although some people thought TCU was going to lose to, I think, Texas, who they played before. And then a lot of people put them on upset alert against Kansas State, Big 12 championship game. And I understand why. A lot of people didn't believe in TCU being a playoff team, even though they were undefeated. So, Big 12 championship game, it looked like Kansas State might blow them out early in the game. And I think if that happened, maybe Bama has a better argument against TCU. But Max was a Duggan, their quarterback, and that team kept fighting back, forced overtime. And I even think there was some controversy in overtime in terms of, I think whether I'm not Tennessee, whether the TCU runner broke the plane or something. I can't remember. I can't remember the play, but I know there was some controversy, mild controversy. But so they end up losing anyway. And yes, they lost to Kansas State. Kansas State's a top 10 team though, so I think that kind of softens the blow against TCU, even though you don't want to lose that late into the season, because we know with the committee, with the human element, the last performance you had can weigh heavily on their minds in terms of where you rank them. But I was of the mindset TCU should stay at number 3. Couple of reasons. One, I'm pretty sure the committee didn't want to put Ohio State at 3 to then have Michigan Ohio State be a semifinal game. The boo guy, once again, on the chairman, said that never factored into the conversation. Find it hard to believe, but if it didn't, more power to him. Two, I couldn't wrap my head around penalizing TCU for losing in a championship game, which I made this point a little bit earlier, but TCU getting their first loss championship game, top 10 team by 3 points in overtime, but rewarding in Alabama that lost 2 games, wasn't even in the SEC title game. So they were sitting at home championship Sunday, but we're going to reward them and move them up over a team losing by 3. So that's where my head was at. I'm glad the committee went the way that I was thinking. Um, yes, Alabama, do you have a reason to be upset? Sure, because you're, used to being part of the playoff year after year, but this year didn't deserve it. Because you can make the argument Alabama could easily have 3 losses because of that Texas game early in the season where Texas was down to like their third string quarterback, but Alabama did win that game. But something we did see all year was Alabama having issues with undiscipline, you know, offensive line and all that because a lot of false start penalties and stuff like that. So maybe this wasn't the strongest Alabama team this year, but I wouldn't. Well, I mean, next season, Alabama's gonna be right up there in the mix again, and we'll have to see what these conversations look like with the expanded playoff, which is supposedly coming 2 years down the line. I mean, I've let you guys know several times I'm a big proponent of the expanded playoff, but I want to see what conversations are had once the field expands to 12. So, so once again, Georgia, Michigan, TCU, Ohio State, your final 4, which means Georgia, Ohio State, one semifinal, Michigan, TCU is the other semifinal. Now, just to remind you guys, uh, so Tuesday night, 7 p.m., I will be on Sports Empire Network. Where you can check us out Facebook Live, YouTube Live, TikiLive.com, live 7 p.m. Tuesday night. Uh, go into more with the college football playoff ranking. bowl season and all that. Continue this conversation over there with my boys Dylan and Jordan. So make sure you tune into that because it'll be a really good conversation. But yeah, so those are my thoughts on the college football playoff. Like I said, I think the committee got it perfectly correct. I have no issues with it. And, let me know what you think down in the comments. Do you believe that this is the right four? If you were on the committee, what would be your four that you would have pitched? So let me know that. Um, and, we can talk about it down in the comment section. But appreciate you guys tuning in. Hopefully, you enjoy this episode. As I always say, be safe out there. God bless. And I'll catch you in the next episode. All right. Have a good day.